This part of Montana, we're lucky that we have a diversity of big game animals, and big game animals are also prey for these large carnivores like wolves and lions and coyotes and bears and those kind of things. Here on the ranch during the wintertime, oftentimes we'll have 3, 4, maybe even 500 elk that spend part of the winter here. We have mule deer, white-tailed deer. We even have had a pronghorn antelope show up, which is very uncommon for this part of the state, so that's very unique, and she's been here since July. So because we have such a healthy population of deer and elk on the ranch, with those come the kinds of animals that like to feed on them, and so coyotes and mountain lions and wolves and black bear, we have all those species on the ranch as well. And so they're able to kind of do their natural thing of looking for deer and elk as possible prey, and they feed on those deer and elk, and they help us manage those populations so that they don't get too out of balance with their food supply. So when we come on a kill site, or a site where a predator has actually killed an elk or a deer or something like that, the first thing we'll do is just kind of stop and take a look at the whole area, as wide an area, to kind of get the wide view of the area of the kill site. And you're looking for how the actual prey looks. Is it like pieces and parts spread all over? Is the carcass or the animal, the dead animal, still all kind of intact? Is the hide kind of stripped off? You know, different tips that help you understand maybe what animal, what predator actually killed that animal. And I know these aren't real pretty, but sometimes there's pieces of the animal that are left, like the head. In this case, it's an elk head. And so immediately, obviously, you know, well, this is an elk.
So one of my favorite days that I've had tracking so far was a couple weeks ago. A fellow tracker and I went out and started hiking up a road, and we got pretty high pretty quickly, so gained a lot of elevation, and we were excited to find a track that went right across the road, which was convenient for us. So we started backtracking, and the track unfortunately ran up into private land, which meant that we couldn't cross that boundary line and keep tracking. So we retraced our steps and continued walking up the road, and we were really excited to come across yet another track, and this one was very, very fresh. So the tracks had awesome definition, and we could tell that maybe that mountain lion had been there a few hours ahead of us, or even closer. So we started backtracking that track as well, and ended up just having a huge adventure following it. So we went up at first a really steep hill, and we're up at a high elevation for most of the day, just following this track, and it was so cool to see the story of how the animal used the landscape. And it really seemed like this cat had been having a really, really good time, because it was running up and down hills and sort of jumping onto rocks and then jumping off, and it would go up to little holes that maybe like a rodent lived in and poke its head into the hole, and you could tell because its paw prints would be right in front of the hole, and then it would keep going. And so it was just a blast to see how this mountain lion explored and used its surroundings. And we were really hoping to get a DNA sample on the individual. And so we followed the track for a few miles, and the weather was getting bad. It was super, super windy and kind of scary. But finally, we were up on top of this really high ridge and under this huge ponderosa, and we found a scat sample. So we were very excited, and it looked like just this beautiful spot for the cat to take a poo and look out at the mountains. So that was about the end of our day when we found that, and then the weather got really bad, so we headed down. But it was just such a fun experience to connect with a mountain lion in that way, of watching it almost play in the mountains.
So last winter I was tracking over in Davis Creek, and I wasn't tracking, I was looking for tracks. And I was following a road in fairly deep snow, about 2 feet of snow, and I was on snowshoes. And then down below me in a draw, I heard a couple of magpies, and that was it. There weren't any other birds or anything around, and I hadn't really seen any interesting tracks at all so far that day. But I figured I'd investigate it, and it could have been, you know, false alarm hearing the magpies. But I made my way down the draw. I started seeing a whole bunch of cat tracks, but I couldn't immediately tell for sure what they were because there were so many of them, and the entire ground was covered with mostly pretty small cat tracks. And I continued advancing through all these tracks, and there were certain areas about this wide that had so many tracks on them that the snow was pretty much just completely ice. And there were several of those tracks all coming out of one area, and I got to the epicenter, and it turned out that there was a white-tailed deer that had been killed there, and pretty much all of the flesh was consumed. And I ascertained that it was a cougar kill because of the way all the fur had been piled back up over the carcass. And as I looked around the kill site some more, I ended up finding an area a latrine, an area where the cougars had been going to the bathroom. And it turned out that there were at least 3 kittens and 1 mom that had all shared this kill, and they'd all gone to the bathroom in this one area. And so for our project, where we're trying to collect scat to get the DNA of all these individual cougars from, it was a treasure trove for us, and we were able to identify all those cats through their DNA.